Good morning, Jay.
Hello, Phil. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Very good. Very good.
Jay, we looking at this third session in our studies about faith. And we're looking at an act of faith today. Independence Day, July 4th, 1776, we ratified the Constitution. They all of them signed it. Some of them, John Hancock, he had a great big signature. He wanted to be sure King George saw it. But we declared our emancipation from Great Britain that day.
Yep.
And those guys that did that, the founders, as we call them, that signed that Constitution, they gave up essentially everything they had from the old country, their status as politicians or persons of leadership, their wealth. They put it all on the line. And the thing that was going to happen, they didn't know.
Right.
They didn't know if they were going to be successful in defeat. Britain was the greatest army on earth.
Mm-hmm.
They had the greatest navy on earth. And so whatever they did, they were going to have to overcome some incredible odds to defeat them. But yet they did it. But they knew that they could lose everything in doing this, even their lives.
Yeah, of course. And their families, their lives, or
each signature on that Declaration of Independence, it not only represents who they were, but it represents what they gave up and what they put out there in faith that they believed was what God wanted them to do. And as they did that, they made that commitment to America's liberty, and they followed through with it. After long, extended, expansive, and I'm sure expensive struggle, America prevailed. But it wasn't without those men, and they became heroes. Some of them in battle, but all of them heroes of faith. Mm-hmm. They became heroes that, based upon their actions, what they undertook for the cause of freedom, they became heroes. And what we're looking at today in Joshua 2, we look at a lady called Rahab.
right.
Now, this is a lady that's in Jesus' genealogy.
Yeah.
And but she doesn't start out so good.
No.
Rahab was facing a similar dilemma. She was either going to remain loyal to the city of Jericho and its leaders, or she was going to follow this newfound way. The Jews had come in, or the Hebrews, and she was going to follow that God. Mm-hmm. She had decided that she was going to follow that God. And the story that she had was very similar, and we'll get into that. But it teaches us that a genuine faith in God requires action, and sometimes immediate action. In her case, certainly it was. Yep. And there's no time for fear, no time for wavering. Her question is she going to remain loyal to the city of Jericho? And we'll find out. Let's look at the scriptures.
Let's look at
as she acts on her new faith.
Let's look at Joshua chapter 2, verses 1 through 4 to start with. It says, Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 men as spies from the Acacia Grove, saying, go and scout the land, especially Jericho. So they left, and they came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelite men have come here tonight to investigate the land. Then the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab and said, bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, for they came to investigate the entire land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. first off, when Joshua wrote the book of Joshua, and every time he uses this title for himself here, Joshua, son of Nun, he did it about 10 times. That indicated he was one of the main characters in the plot that was going to happen. So here he says, Joshua, son of Nun. He sent 2 spies in to scout out the land, and particularly Jericho. Now, Phil, we don't know exactly when this was, but last week we studied about Joshua telling the people, get ready, because in 3 days we're going to go into the promised land and go across Jordan and go into the promised land. And to be honest, Jericho's not but just a few miles from the Jordan River. Kind of up on a little rise at where the Jericho River or Jordan River used to flood a whole lot. So it wouldn't have been take too long for them to get there. So it's probably during that 3-day period of time when the people were getting ready to cross over that these spies were in there looking around. He tells them to look particularly around Jericho. Now I don't think he knew at this point in time how God was going to fight the battle. But being the good leader he was, a good military leader he was, Joshua wanted to know what he was facing. So he sent these 2 spies in, and it says that they ended up at a house of a prostitute called Rahab. The question is, why would God send them to a prostitute or to a house of ill repute? And the writer talks about 2 or 3 different things. It was probably a good place to gather information.
Sure.
Without questions being asked, what are you doing here and why are you doing it and all this. It's a secret place. And it was also a house that was built into the wall of the city, which we talked about a little bit about last week, and had windows that would allow somebody to be dropped out over the side of the wall. It was a good place to escape from. Probably the real reason was that God knew Rahab's heart and knew that she would have play a significant role in the victory of the Israelites over Jericho. God knew Rahab's heart, which he knows all of our hearts. And also we know that, we've seen this in the Bible lots of times, Phil, that God uses people with a simple faith. She didn't know much about God. She had heard stories about what God had done for the Israelite people, but she wasn't a follower of God, I don't think, but she had a simple faith that he was with those people. And God uses people like her, people with a simple faith, to do great things. That's what he did in this case. So Rahab, they've come to Rahab and are there visiting with her. And somebody, can't you just see, Phil, there was probably several men at this
Or around
house
the
of
neighborhood.
right, that saw these strangers. Jericho wasn't a very big town, although it did have its own king, but saw these strangers in town. And it didn't take them long to get to the king. Something's going on. Somebody's spying around on us. And of course, they had all heard about the Israelites, and they knew the Israelites were camped right across the river from them, and they knew they were watching out for them. Somebody went directly to the king, and the king then sends word to Rahab and said, "Bring them out." Well, Rahab has already figured out that she's made that decision, Phil, as you said. What do? Am I loyal to the king of Jericho? Or am I going to be loyal to this God that I really know very little about, but I know what kind of power he has? I've heard stories of what he has done for the Israelite people. Mm-hmm. And we're going to see in the next verses that you read a little bit more about that. But so Rahab was put in a bad spot. But it says there that in the last verse 4a that she had already taken the 2 men and hidden them. She knew, she probably saw the people leave the establishment and run out the door whenever these Israelites came in. She probably knew that the king would soon be there, because she hid those spies real quick. So here's a lady, Rahab, who is already, as the writer says, on the outskirts of humanity. She wasn't a well-spoken of person.
And they wouldn't think 2 seconds about killing her.
No, absolutely not. No, not at all. If they had known she hid them,
Oh,
they
been
she,
drug out in the street and stoned to death.
exactly right. Well, she was in a terrible predicament. Should she sell out the Lord's spies, or should she be loyal to the king, or should she be loyal to the spies and to the God of the Israelites and sell out the king of Jericho? And she chose to be on the Lord's side. So that's the basis for what she's done. She's now hidden the spies, and the king's looking for them. She's made her stance based on the story she's heard about the Israelite and their king, or their God, and what he can do for them, has done for them, and I think for what she believes is going to happen in the future. Do we always act in the face of fear? Are we always faithful in the face of fear? We hope we are, and we've seen stories of it in our lifetime of people confessing Christ, knowing that as soon as they do, they're going to die. Mm-hmm. And that's what she was facing. Mm-hmm. She didn't know how the battle was going to come out. She didn't know if it could easily have been that as far as she's concerned, maybe the king of Jericho could defeat the Israelites. She didn't know that, which side to be on as far as the outcome was concerned, but she knew what side she wanted to be on as far as her faith was concerned. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what happens in the...
Well, I think she kind of believed that they were going to prevail.
Well, I think she thought there was a good possibility because of the story she'd heard about.
Well, let's look at the next verse here, and we'll see what she tells these guys that she's hidden. It said, before the men fell asleep, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, mm-hmm. and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and everyone who lives in the land is panicking because of you. For we've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt. And what you did to Sihon and Og, the two Amorite kings you completely destroyed across the Jordan. When we heard this, we lost heart, and everyone's courage failed because of you, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. Now, please swear to me by the Lord that you will also show kindness to my father's family, because I showed kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father, mother, brothers, sisters, and all who belong to them, and save us from death. The men answered her, we will give our lives for yours if you don't report our mission. We will show kindness and faithfulness to you when the Lord gives us the land. So here they are. They're up under a bunch of reeds.
Yeah, on top
got
of
a bunch of reeds piled up on them.
Right.
And she's going around and slipping, looking down at them saying, you know, you all are going to win this battle, but I want you to save my family.
Yeah.
She makes some startling professions here.
She does, doesn't she?
Yeah. Their Lord had already given Jericho to Israel. Yeah. Now that's her speaking to them about what she thinks is going to happen.
Right.
And she thinks it's already a done thing. Boy, it takes some faith to believe mm-hmm. that when you're sitting on the side of a walled city. The Jericho was a pretty good fortress.
Yep.
And, high walls and,
right.
and protected from outside attacks. But then she had observed something else. Terror and panic had filled the hearts of the people of Jericho. She says everyone that lives in the land is panicking because of you. They'd all heard the tales. And here's the thing, we all hear tales, but sometimes those tales grow too, don't they?
Yeah.
And when it's so incredible what happened, and then they hear it secondhand.
Maybe this is akin to World War II, when the Germans started bombing England, London. Can you imagine what the fear of those people felt? Because it was night after night after night that those sirens would go off and they would have to go into there. They were panicked, I'm sure,
Yeah.
because of what they were hearing, seeing physically firsthand. But she said these people are scared to death.
But she gave her spies there a couple of reasons why. She said God had divided
Yeah.
the Red Sea.
Yeah.
That don't happen every day, JR.
No.
God had divided the Red
Now, that was
Sea and
and
y'all
that-
came across on dry land.
And that was 40 years before, but that story.
Right. Well, it's going to repeat itself here a little bit. Yeah, he divided the Red Sea, and then they had utterly destroyed two strong kings across the Jordan
Right.
in Sihon and Og.
Right.
And I don't know if I'm pronouncing either name right, but
Close enough.
you can read about it, and they just totally wiped them out. It was kind of like a warm up. So when that happened, everybody in Jericho lost heart, she says, and their courages failed. They were scared to death. They were running.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they wouldn't even been worried about two people coming in there that were
No.
strangers, would they?
They were looking out for something like this.
Those spies could have seen her as a threat. You know, she might talk. We might need to kill them. But they didn't. They listened to her request and took an oath to protect her and her family from death. And not only because she had shown kindness to them, but for her witness. You know, what they really believed was her core belief now.
Yeah.
That God had given them the battle, and that, you know, she professed there that your God is God on earth, in heaven and below, you know, here on earth. And so with that testimony, I think they thought they were pretty good and on solid ground. You got to consider where she comes from, polytheism, you know,
Right.
belief in many different gods.
Right.
And there's really no substance to it. And, but yet that's what the people around her and the community believed, you know, in different gods. You had a God of the wind, God of the rain, God of the harvest, and just these are gods with little g's.
Right. Right.
We serve the God with the big G.
Mm-hmm.
But she talked about his power, and she expressed faith in him. And she talked about showing kindness to him. Well, I imagine she'd show kindness to a lot of men.
Probably.
She was a prostitute.
Yeah.
But what was different? You know, she
Yeah.
had utterly respected them, even as strangers, and had hid them when they came after them. She believed, too, that God was powerful enough to save her and her family.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she talks about that, and giving me a sure sign, well, they tell her to wrap a scarlet cord around
Around her door.
around the rope out the window.
Out the window, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so they wouldn't think anything about that flying from a prostitute's window. would
Yeah,
they?
probably not.
You know,
We're open for business.
Said, look at there, she's got her sign out. People of the city, I'm talking about.
Right.
You know, they wouldn't think anything about it.
I think they also told her to bring all of her family inside her house, right?
Right.
In her, and keep them inside there.
Yeah.
If they went outside, it was on their own.
In subsequent verses, they laid out that if you don't have them inside,
Yeah.
you're going to be responsible if they're killed.
Yeah. Right.
And
No,
we're
no.
not going to stop killing. Everybody's going to be killed outside of your house. So you have them in the house and don't let them come out. And so that's eventually what she did. In the next verses, we see that when we act in faith, others benefit. You know, she could have not taken any action. She
Right.
could have not hidden them, just pushed them out. And she would have probably been all right that day.
Yeah.
but what about when they
Next,
came back?
yeah. I like that last verse, that the last part of the last verse, when the men are talking. They said, if you don't report, and she said, we will show they said, we will show kindness and faithfulness to you when the Lord gives us the land. They also knew that the Lord was gonna give them that land. They had the same faith she did.
Yeah,
In other words, she believed exactly what they did, and that kind of meshed it together. Now, we're jumping over to chapter 6 now. A lot happens between 2 and 6.
whole lot happens in the
Whole lot
book.
happens between 2 and 6. First, it starts off with the crossing of Jordan River. As you said, the Jordan River dries up just like the Red Sea did.
Yep.
And we know that the Ark of the Covenant was taken out to the center of the river and held there until all the army passed across. Then they took 12 stones out of the middle of the river, took them over and put them, built a monument, or I don't know what you memorial on the other side of the river, and then they brought the ark out, and they're finally now across the river. Now I thought it was interesting, Phil, to note that my Bible talks about this. It's not in the verses, but I think it's mentioned other places that after one night in the Promised Land, the manna quit coming down, and they're on their own. God said, "I'm gonna feed you till you get to the Promised Land." Well, then they had to, from that point on, they had to feed themselves off the land.
You know, one other thing I didn't really, I mean, I knew, but I didn't ever grasp it. And when they crossed the Jordan, it says that the water was walled up on one side.
Yeah, on
It was dammed up.
Yep.
The Lord
So
held it back, and they come across, not in mud. It says they come across on dry
yeah,
land.
Yeah.
Now, that's a miracle.
But people try to explain that. Well, there was an earthquake or something that stopped the water up north. It would be toward the Sea of Galilee, because the Jordan River, the Dead Sea was below them. It doesn't matter how God did it. I don't care how He did it. He did it.
Yeah.
Whether it was a wall, or whether it was a huge earthquake that swallowed it up for a few hours, or it doesn't matter.
Well, you know, when the Red Sea, they said mighty wind.
Right, mighty
know,
wind did it.
But we don't have that here.
No.
We have God holding the water back, and the river dried up.
Yeah. And also in those verses we didn't read, God tells them how to fight the battle.
Yeah.
You walk around, you get your army, you take the Ark of the Covenant in front, I think there was a few people in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and then your soldiers follow around, you march around the city once a day for 6 days, all the way around it. And you don't say anything, you don't make any noise, maybe the trumpet's blowing, but then the 7th day, is it 6 days, 6 times or 7 times? I forget which is.
Then on the 7th day, 7 times around, and then you stop and blow the trumpets and you shout.
And he said, I don't want you, don't ever, I think he tells them, don't shout anymore except the time I tell you to shout. And of course we know what happened when they did it, the walls fell down. Don't you imagine those people feel where, by that time, you have this army marching around you 6 days in a row, and there was, I think, that I read where there was 40,000 fighting men or something in that group. You'd be scared to death. Mm-hmm. You were just wondering when they were going to attack, You had to be in tents all the time.
That's part of it.
That's part of it. Getting more worked up and scared all the time.
I've wondered too, how many of them were digging holes to hide in?
Yeah.
You know, inside the city walls.
Yeah.
Could that have had something to do with it?
Could have.
You know, we don't know.
We don't know, but we know it was a bad situation the people in Jericho found themselves. And Rahab was the only one probably that knew they didn't have a chance. The rest of them were willing to fight, but she knew they didn't have a chance. So that's what's happened in chapters 3, 4, and 5, plus other things, but that's the main things. So now they're in there, and the walls have fallen down, the soldiers have gone in, and here's what Joshua tells the 2 spies in verses 22 and 25 of Joshua chapter 6. Joshua said to the 2 men who had scattered the land, go to the prostitute's house, that's Rahab, and bring the woman out of there, and all who are with her, just as you swore to her. So the young men who had scattered went in and brought Rahab and her father, her mother, brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought her whole family and settled them outside the camp of Israel. They burned the city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. However, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her father's family, and all who belonged to her, because she had hid the messengers Joshua sent to spy on Jericho, and she still lives in Israel today. It played out just like the men said it would. You take your family into your house. As long as they stay there, they're fine. And they plundered the city, and they killed everyone. God explicitly told the Israelites to do that on numerous occasions. We said, well, that's mean. Well, God knew what kind of people the Israelites were, and knew that if there was anybody left and they would intermarry with them, they would start worshiping the same gods that they did. He knew what the problem was going to cause by leaving people alive, and he wanted to kill them. So they did in Jericho for sure. But on the way to Jericho, a little story about Joshua encountering a man who looked like he was dressed for military duty and had a sword pulled. And Joshua asked him, whose side was he on? You on our side, or are you on the king of Jericho's side? Well, I think he said was neither for Joshua nor his enemies, but was a commander of the Lord's army. There's several questions about, or comments about what that might be. He might have been an invisible army that the Lord had there in the ready, and I really think that's probably what it was, that God was there with his army. Didn't have to have him, of course, didn't have to have them, but it also could have been when the man said, I'm neither for Joshua or his enemies, that he was saying, the army you're leading is not yours. The army you're leading is my army, is God's army. Mm-hmm. And you're just there in name. You're not the leader of it. I'm the leader of it. But anyway, it doesn't matter that this strange encounter happened on the way to Jerusalem, to Jericho. So now we see the battle's over.
Did you find it odd that he says, I'm not for you, I'm not for your enemy?
I think was neither for Joshua or his enemies, but the commander of the Lord's army. I'm not sure he wasn't kind of putting Joshua in his place early on, saying, you're not really the leader of this army, I am. Yeah. And maybe that's what it was.
I don't know. It just
yeah.
You know, you think, well, yeah, I'm for you.
Yeah.
You think
that I'm gonna be
in our way of thinking.
I'm going to be supporting you, backing you up.
But it's not that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little different.
Yeah. So the battle's over. Joshua now tells the spies to bring out Rahab, and just as they told her before, she was spared because of where she had her family, and they brought them out and outside the camp, and she was there during the mop up of the city, I guess is kind of what you would say. She still lives in there today. Now, the writer seems to think that means her family, when this was written, this book of Joshua was written, she was still part of the Israelite camp and still lived there in that area. And as you said earlier, and I think I had that written down in my first verses, Rahab is mentioned not only here, but throughout the New Testament. Yeah. James mentions her in his area. He referred to her as a prostitute, but who was an example of faith being accompanied by works. Yeah. She did her faith. She had her faith, so she worked because of her faith. She's mentioned as one of the few women in genealogy to Jesus. And there's a hall of fame in Hebrews in Jesus. Talks about men of faith and women of faith, and she's mentioned in there because of her faith. So Rahab is mentioned throughout the scriptures about the faith that she had. Mm-hmm. Now, as the writer says here, Phil, that she had no idea what the end result of her faith would be when she first started going down this path. But she knew her faith wasn't wasted by putting it in the hands of the God of the Israelites. She knew he was powerful enough, he could do whatever he wanted to do. And
Yeah, it could save her and her family
Save her and her
immediately.
family,
That
yeah.
was her concern, wasn't it?
And our faith is never wasted, and results are multiplied in the lives of others. Anytime we stand on our faith, it's not wasted, and other people see that and sometimes it leads them to have the same faith that we've exhibited at times in our lives. Rahab's faith, in turn, stood her faith in the face of fear. She wasn't scared for herself. Or the king, she wasn't scared of the king of Jericho because of who she was following.
Mm-hmm.
Rahab came to faith because of God's actions in the past. She mentioned some of those: the parting of the Red Sea, the bringing the plagues in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
They had all heard those stories. The God sustained them for 40 years in the desert, in the wilderness. She knew those stories, and she came to faith because of those stories. How many people, and I wrote this down, how many people will have faith in God because of our faith in him and because of Rahab? But then what about us? How about because of our faith in him as we walk through life? That's the question. She had, how many people came because of her? Thousands of people came because of her. Her whole family did, for sure, and how that played out through the generations. But what about us today? Do we have the faith that Rahab had in the face of fear? And how many people see that? And does it have an impact on our life?
So what do we do with the study? We see Rahab, we see what she did. Well, maybe we don't have that same opportunity,
Right. Not to say her.
but we all are presented with opportunities. We should pray to God that we recognize those opportunities to bring others to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And we take action like she did, irregardless of how we think it's going to affect us personally.
Mm-hmm.
Do the right thing. Do what God wants us to do. When you see the results of what Rahab did, you got to include the obedience that she showed in doing exactly what the man told her to do. And in turn, they exactly did what they said they would do.
Yeah.
In keeping her, and with that, she saved herself and the whole family. She became in the lineage of Jesus.
Yeah, yeah.
So it goes to show us too, God can use each and every one of us. Time after time, we look through this Bible and we see him using a prostitute to win a war.
Mm-hmm.
We see, 300 men go into the camp in Gideon,
Right.
where they had tens of thousands
Right.
of soldiers there, and they beat them with 300 men. God does miraculous things with anybody who yields to his Holy Spirit and puts their faith into action. And if anything tells us that, it's this story right here. And there's many more.
We've seen numerous men or women, mostly men, but who have turned their life completely around and have been drug addicts, have been whatever it is, as bad of people as they can be, but yet they become great Christians, great warriors for Christ, for God, because of their change in their life, their faith in God.
You talk about faith, you can't talk about faith without talking about David.
No.
And we're going to do that next
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
I hope you can join us. I hope you enjoyed today. We enjoyed bringing it to you. Look forward to being with you next week. We'll talk about David and his faith. Thank you for watching.